Joffrey's insane reign ended in a flash, out of fear of what he was capable of, if his ass remained on the Iron Throne. From the end of the first book to the end of the third book, the teenage psychopath ruled as King of the Seven Kingdoms, that's spanning 2 years to 300 AC. A very short rule, but probably longer than some realized because of how fast-paced the story was in the books. But this is not the shortest reign in the story. Out of all 21 rulers to sit on the Iron Throne, there's only one reign shorter than Joffrey the Illborn. This non-accomplishment goes to King Viserys II, not Daenerys' older brother who was called the Beggar King, or the King Viserys that we're gonna see in House of the Dragon. It's actually that King Viserys' grandson, who was named after him. Viserys II is overlooked in the lore because of his crazy family all being colorful characters. There's an in-story book by a maester that wrote a historical book about 4 kings in his lifetime.
Book?
And just skipped over Viserys II to write about his son, who would succeed him instead. The one single year he was in power was like the eye of the storm. There was so much chaos before and after him, so his reign is one of the more peaceful time periods in all the lore. Despite this, he isn't even remembered fondly. Because of how short his peaceful time in power was, most characters remembered him for all the other years he spent in court serving his family. For decades, the exact amount of time isn't given to us. He served first as his older brother's Hand of the King, and then continued to serve as Hand of the King for both of his brother's sons. Viserys was never expected to become king one day, but his 2 nephews, King Daeron and Baelor the Blessed, never had any children. Some would suspect Viserys may have had a hand in Baelor's death, but once you take the time to understand this interesting character, it's pretty obvious he had nothing to do with it. In fact, he helped his nephews out more than anyone else. In the span of 14 years, the realm saw 3 very iconic kings, but it was Viserys doing the heavy lifting for them. Think of a nicer version of Tywin Lannister. It's been written that while Daeron warred and Baelor prayed, Viserys ruled. For 14 years he served as hand to his nephews, and before that he served his brother, King Aegon III. It is said he was the shrewdest hand since Septon Barth, though his good efforts were diminished in the reign of the Broken King, who lacked any desire to please his subjects or win their love. His brother the Broken King had another more popular epithet, the Dragonbane. It was during his reign that the last of the Targaryen dragons died out, to many of the non-dragon riders' relief. Dragons cause the small folk so much death and destruction. Seeing them gone was seen as a thing to celebrate for many. Viserys' brother, the Dragonbane, dealt with a lot of depression that we'll see the origins of in House of the Dragon, so Viserys picked up the slack. The Dragonbane's sons were more lively than ever in comparison to their father. Viserys couldn't talk his eldest nephew Daeron out of a war for conquering Dorne that would cost him his young life. Viserys had to keep the realm together in the capital, King's Landing, while Daeron spent his whole reign fighting in a pointless war in Dorne. Baelor the Blessed was a religious nut, completely obsessed with the faith of the Seven. So again, Viserys was needed to control another wild Targaryen king, since Baelor's decision-making wasn't based in reality. Baelor reigned a little longer than his older brother Daeron, but would also die young, starving himself to death during one of his religious fasts. So no, not killed by his uncle. That storytelling trope doesn't apply here with the evil, power-hungry relative. Dealing with his foolish and ambitious nephews was one thing, but the people propping up their crazy ideas made things so much more difficult for the Hand. Up until the current story, these 2 brothers are consistently brought up as favorites depending on a character's values. A young and high-spirited character would look up to Daeron, and the religious look up to Baelor. Only the quiet and competent few look back fondly at Viserys II. The Targaryen was crowned at 49 years old. I believe that's a record for any king of the Seven Kingdoms. With no one getting in the way of his work, Viserys immediately slaved away bettering the realm forever. Before all these details, first a word from the video's sponsor, NordPass, from the great cybersecurity experts over at NordVPN. If you're using one of those easy login methods like signing in with Facebook, there's a chance someone out there with really bad intentions can get a hold of all your accounts that you're using through this method, then go on to commit crimes or take out loans using your identity, since they now have access to everything they need, including personal info like our address, date of birth, and banking info. If you want to keep this to yourself and yourself alone, consider checking out NordPass. Not only is it a more secure password manager that Nord itself won't have access to view, it's an essential cybersecurity tool, making yourself comfortable to quickly do some online shopping or scrolling through social media. Aside from storing all your passwords in one place, allowing you to log in websites faster, NordPass's data breach scanner will find out if your online account or credit card information has been leaked, then identify where and when it happened, and what type of data was compromised. Get an exclusive offer on a 2-year NordPass premium plan by going to nordpass.com/whycreate, or just use code whycreate at checkout. Using either method will get you an additional month free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee. They're legit as it gets when it comes to cybersecurity. If you want to protect your identity, use that link. Bringing things back to Viserys II, we know about his reforms of the royal household and its functions, the establishment of a new royal mint, his efforts to increase trade across the Narrow Sea, and his revisions of the code of laws that Jaehaerys the Conciliator had established during his long reign. The old King Jaehaerys is seen as the best king ever to sit on the Iron Throne, for how much he progressed things for the realm, and the lore books state Viserys II had it in him to be just as impactful, if only his life wasn't cut short. Shrewd is the word that's used to describe him in World of Ice and Fire. We get the majority of his life detailed, and I think we'll get a little more about this character and his reign when the second volume of Fire and Blood is completed, whenever George R. R. Martin and his staff get to it. That book is supposed to kick things off with his reign. Volume 1 ended with his older brother, Aegon the Dragonbane. Viserys' family made his life very difficult, and his own son would be the one to bring his reign and life to an end. Long before he became king, Viserys married and had 3 children, together with Lara Rogaire. She never felt welcomed at court in King's Landing, so returned back home to her homeland, Lys, a paradise-like island city in Essos, very soon after her children were born, completely abandoning her family. She would never return to Westeros to visit her family, and this changed the once warm Viserys. He named his firstborn son after his older brother Aegon. While I consider Viserys to be one of the better kings, his son would grow up to be one of the worst, if not the worst. Aegon IV covered the Iron Throne long before his father sat on it, so after a series of events when he miraculously became the heir, he lost his patience. He couldn't wait for his 50-year-old father to croak, and the 37-year-old Aegon likely poisoned his father to speed up the succession process. The World of Ice and Fire details his death by stating, "Tragically, a sudden illness carried him away in 172 AC. It need not be said that some found the illness and swiftness suspicious, but none dared speak their suspicion at the time. It would be more than a decade before the first accusation was put to paper that Viserys had been poisoned by none other than his successor, his son Aegon. Is there truth to this suspicion? We cannot say for certain. But given all the infamous and corrupt deeds of Aegon the Unworthy, both before and after he assumed the crown, it cannot be discounted. Aegon was truly unworthy. His whole life was ruled by his lusts, and he was easily manipulated by others by just offering up their daughters or whatever else he had his eye on. This isn't to say his father's parenting was the cause. Looking at Viserys' 2 other children, they're some of the most beloved characters in the lore, and within in-story songs. Aemon the Dragon Knight was the middle child, who I went on and on about in a past video, calling him the greatest knight in terms of skill and how he carried himself. Their little sister Daenerys was the fragile princess that Viserys ordered Aegon the Unworthy to marry as per Targaryen tradition. Aemon defended his sister as best he could while he was alive, but Aegon treated her horribly, progressively worse after the crown was put atop his fat head. The Unworthy put the realm through hell during his reign, and even generations onward through horrible, almost evil decision-making. And still characters don't look back at the good times with Viserys II during his very short reign.